I'm at a party. Close friends, people I've known for years, but there are a few faces that I don't recognize. Someone introduces me around, and one of the new people looks at me and asks the most normal question in the world. So what do you do? And I panicked. Not on the outside. I kept that all together. But on the inside, something just seized up because for the first time in 30 years, I didn't have an answer. What was I supposed to say? That up until recently, I was the training and development manager overseeing 5 countries, the U.S., Canada, Australia, Mexico, and New Zealand. That I had actually spent 3 decades building teams, training thousands of professionals, and now I was interviewing for an account manager role where I'd be receiving the exact training that I used to deliver. So I did what any self-respecting 54-year-old does in an awkward situation. I made a joke. Honestly, the easiest way to describe it is I sell shampoo. They laughed, I laughed, and then I went home and sat with just how lost I actually felt. Hi, I'm Christian, and that party was the moment I realized that somewhere along the way, I had stopped being a person and became a job title. And this is the story of what I learned when that title disappeared and the 3 things that pulled me out the other side. For 30 years, what I did was who I was. I didn't even realize it until it was gone. My career had been my suit of armor. I was the guy with the answers, the one managing teams across multiple countries, the one whose calendar was wall to wall because being busy meant being important. And then it stopped. Not in some dramatic movie moment way, more like a slow leak. Burnout that had been building for years, a role that had run its course, and this quiet but growing feeling that the work didn't mean quite what it used to. One day I was a senior leader in the company. The next day I was figuring it out. The silence was deafening. Waking up without somewhere to be didn't feel like freedom. It felt like being dropped in the middle of the ocean with no land in sight. And the worst part wasn't the uncertainty about what came next. The worst part was realizing I didn't know who I was without the title. That question at the party, what do you do? It felt like an accusation because my entire sense of self had been outsourced to an employer for decades. And now that contract was up, I felt like a zero. Here's what I know now that I wish I knew then. You are not your job title. You never were. The skills, the judgment, the ability to walk into a room and figure out what needs to happen, none of that lives in a title. It lives in you. But I had to lose the title to finally understand that. And the first step was the hardest one. Here's what nobody tells you about starting over at 54. Your ego will be the last thing to cooperate. I was scrolling through job listings thinking I used to manage the people who did this. I was walking into interviews for roles I wasn't sure I wanted, trying to figure out how to explain why a guy who oversaw training across 5 countries wanted to be an account manager. And the honest answer was because I needed the work and because sometimes you have to be willing to come in a different door. That was hard to admit. I'd spent 30 years being the one at the front of the room. Now I was going to be sitting in the audience, receiving the training instead of the one delivering it. And here's what I didn't expect. It actually made me better because for the first time in a long time, I had to listen instead of direct, ask instead of answer, prove myself in a context where my old title meant absolutely nothing. And what I found was the skills were still there. The ability to read a room, to understand what people actually need versus what they say they need, and to build trust quickly. Those who don't go away when the title does. I just had to be willing to use them somewhere new. Adaptability isn't a consolation prize for people who lost something. It's the skill that makes everything else possible. Even after I figured out the practical side of things, I was still exhausted because I was spending so much energy managing how it all looked to other people. Old colleagues would ask how things were going, and I'd find myself framing it just right, making it sound like a strategic pivot, a choice, like I had it all figured out. The truth was messier than that, and somewhere in the middle of all that exhaustion, something shifted. I was working through a problem. Nothing career-defining, nothing legacy-building, just a problem that needed solving, and I solved it. And I felt genuinely good about it. Not because anyone was watching, not because it would look impressive anywhere, just because it was useful and I had done it. That was the moment I stopped caring about the scorecard nobody else could actually see anyway. Because here's the truth about external validation. It's a game with no finish line. You can spend your whole career chasing the next title, the next number, the next acknowledgement, and never once feel like you've actually arrived. The only scorecard that ever mattered was whether the work meant something to you. When I finally stopped performing my career for an audience, I actually started enjoying it. Losing my identity at 54 felt like everything was ending. Looking back now, it was the beginning of the most honest chapter of my life. Let go of the title. It was never who you were. Be willing to come in a different door. The skills travel with you, and stop performing your life for an audience that isn't keeping score anyway. If you're sitting somewhere right now feeling too old to start over and too young to stop, I want you to hear this. You're not starting from zero. You're starting from experience. I'll see you in the next one.